Hey guys, for those of you who missed class because you were so tired and needed some rest, I just wanted to kind of go over what we talked about during the class as it comes to selecting objects in Photoshop. We're going to talk about how you can take things like from images and cut them out using various tools in Photoshop so that we'll be able to work next week using the cutout system. Now, by the end of this video, you should be able to create a 10-second motion project using the objects that I've provided you. Now, if you're in the lab, all you have to do is go into the Resources tab under Week 6 and pull the cutout images down to your computer. And make sure you don't just take them out of the Week 6 folder because they're not gonna work. So you have to pull them down to the desktop, and then just go ahead and open stuff up. And what you're going to see are several images. As you can see, they're JPEGs. One of them is, or one or two of them are PNG files, and you're going to be very careful about those because Photoshop will, by default, save them as PNG files. But let's get started just by looking at the images that are in the folder. And we're going to start with the most basic one. We're going to start with the water image. It's got a name like ACEB. We're going to open this with Photoshop. I want you to do it a specific way this time. I want you to take that image and I want you to drag it onto the Photoshop icon. When you do that, when you take the image and then you drag it onto the Photoshop icon, you'll see that it automatically opens up the entire frame as a single file background. It doesn't make it smart object. It doesn't worry about the shape of it. It'll open it up as if it was just a normal object. Now before starting, let's go to Workspace and just reset motion. We'll stay in the motion space, and I want to make sure that you're on the selection, the Move tool, V for Move. So for all our selections, we're going to have some transparency. So every single time we open up an image, double-click the background so that this layer is no longer locked. Now the first tool we're going to talk about is the Marquee tool. If you click and hold, you'll see you have two choices, a circle and a square. And the way that this works is if you click, hold, and drag and select an area, just like this rectangle up top here, you can now, if you wanted to, on this layer, just hit the delete button and we can actually delete the sky. We're going to want this water layer as one of the objects for our composition. At this point, I deselect by going to Select, Deselect, or Command D, and this object now is ready to save with a transparent sky. So let's go ahead and go File, Save, and because it will, because we've removed the background layer, it is no longer a JPEG. So you'll notice that the Photoshop automatically selects it automatically selects as Photoshop. Let's go ahead and call this water. And what we're going to do is all the cutout images are going to be saved in a special new folder, and let's just call it Finished. Finished, finished. And everything that we do for this lesson is going to be put into our finished folder. And we're going to hit OK. And we're going to go ahead and close this up. And we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to move Photoshop out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the second image that we worked on in class. It's this first hot air balloon 4.1 JPEG. And I'm going to drag it into Photoshop. It's important you do it this way because otherwise, I guess you can go to File, Open. That'll be the same thing, and then find it on the desktop. That'll open it as well. But either way, I want this to be in its own file. You'll notice the background again. Double-click that to unlock it. We're going to be doing this every time. We're going to actually take this balloon out of the frame, and we're going to be using a different tool. Obviously, the Marquee tool, like we did before, won't be very useful for selecting this because this is a square and the balloon is a different shape. So I'm deselecting here. Now, we've got some tools below the Marquee tool, the Lasso tool. This allows us to actually lasso around an object, but with a mouse, it's kind of hard. You can kind of see that I have selected it, but this is kind of the worst possible case for selecting something. We do have other tools. I'm going to deselect just so you can see. I have the polygon lasso, and this allows me a little bit more control. You can see if I zoom in, I can click And what I'm doing is just clicking one step at a time. And if this were a square or, you know, a more, how do you call it, not so organic of a shape or round of a shape, this lasso would actually work. And the way that the lasso works, command minus here a couple times, is that you keep going until you reach the beginning, and then you have a selection, and it selects this area. If you wanted to add to the selection because you didn't get everything, you're going to hold the Shift key down, start the selection, and that will allow you to add to the selection. And then double clicking, and you can see I'm already starting to pull in this object. This tool is not the right tool for this balloon, but I did want to show it to you because we're going to be using it for the other stuff, the lasso tool and the polygon. Right below that, you know, is the magic wand tool. You've been using that, but I'm going to use something different this time. I'm going to change it to the quick select tool. Has the same letter. Notice something is selected here, so I'm going to go to select, deselect, or command D. And the way that this tool works is it actually paints a selection. So you can see that if I'm just painting on the object, it has like a little brush, and you can even make this brush bigger or smaller with the bracket keys, just like a regular brush. It'll actually paint, and it'll look for the boundaries. And you can see it does a really great job using artificial intelligence for finding these boundaries. Now, obviously it didn't pick up this basket, so I'm going to click on the basket, and you notice now it's picked up a little bit more. It's missing these two elements. I'm going to make the brush a little smaller. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. This is the nice part about this quick select. It actually works just like a brush, so you're very careful not to make any mistakes, and we're just brushing in what we want. Now if you accidentally do this and pick up more than you need, the Option key takes away from a selection. So I'm holding the Option key, and that's getting rid of the things that I didn't want. Now don't worry about this part because we're going to just erase that in a moment. I'm going to zoom out, command 0. Now the layer was double clicked, so if I hit the delete key at this point, do I get to keep the balloon? No, because I actually selected the balloon, so I'm going to undo that. What you want to do is select the inverse of that and just Shift Command I is a keyboard shortcut, and now I've selected the entire sky, and if I hit the delete button at this point, you're going to see that now I have what I want. With the exception of a couple things here, you'll notice that you can actually see some of the people in here, and this is not the background I want. I want to be able to see through this. There are ways that you can, I'm going to deselect. There are ways that you can just use that quick select to select an area like this, and then just hit the delete button. Sometimes it's just too small, like here. So another possibility is just to use the E for eraser tool, and then pick an eraser size and brush that is just a normal, maybe something small, and smaller than 15. And just go ahead and deselect, because you have to be deselected. And what you can do is just hand erase the things that you don't want. Right, so I'm going to erase that, erase that. The other possibility is to use this lasso tool, right? Especially for hard edges. So you could just say I don't. You can just create a selection like that and then hit the delete button, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can get rid of something by selecting it and then hitting the delete button. Command 0 to zoom out. Now to see how good the selection is, a lot of times people will put another layer just temporarily under the selection and then fill it with the letter G with a color like black. This way you can really see what you've missed or didn't miss. And you can see right away that there's some fringing that's happening here, so on my selection. And if I were putting this over a dark background, you would actually see this. So just going in with the eraser tool and just erasing away like this erases all the halos. You don't have to do the greatest job, but it is good to know when you haven't, like when you missed something. And this is one really nice way of just kind of go in with the eraser tool. Oops, made a mistake there. And seeing how bad, you can kind of see some real issues here. So hopefully I won't be putting it on a background that's dark, because you'll see all this haloing. And you can go through and try to get rid of it. But honestly, if I just invert this Command I, you can see how much better it looks on a white background, right? Just get rid of this little piece here. So if this is a white background, it's going to look great. If it's a dark background, it'll probably have some problems with this basket. All right, let's delete that, that layer. We don't want it. We want transparency. And we're going to go to File, Save, and save it as a balloon, BALLOON1. And I'm going to put that in my finished folder. And I'm going to make sure it's Photoshop because I want that transparency. Hit OK and close that down, Command W. Let's pick up the second balloon this time. Go to, just again, dragging it onto the Photoshop icon. We'll open it up with Photoshop. Let's go ahead and try that. There it is. Now, we could use that quick select tool again if we want. We'd do the exact same thing, but here's an object select tool. And I want to go ahead and show you how this works. It's looking for an object. So if we just click, hold, and drag around the object that we want, it should find it. Now, before I let go, if you made a mistake and you started way too far up, maybe you started up here and you're doing this entire thing, it might select too much. If you hold the space key down while you have your selection, that allows you to move the rectangle. And if you let go of the space, you can now resize. So this allows you to get very tight on the object that you want to select. And almost perfect, actually. If you hold the space bar, you can actually get that upper left, top and left going, and then let go of the space bar, and this allows you to modify that rectangle. Now I let go, and lo and behold, take a look. It did a really good job of selecting. We have to double click the background, and we have to invert the selection, Shift Command I. And now if we hit delete, you'll see that's a pretty good selection. From far away, this looks really good. Now obviously we're missing a couple things here, but that's okay. This is going to be a distant balloon, so people probably won't see that so much. So let's go ahead and go to File, Save, make sure it's Photoshop, and call it Balloon 2, BALLOON 2, and we're going to put that in our finished area. I think I saved the last one in somewhere else, so I'm going to make sure I drag that into that finished area. You can kind of see my finished folder has that one, but it also has, yeah, it has the two balloons actually, so that's good. The next thing we're going to pick up is the cliff. So we're going to drag the cliff onto our Photoshop icon, and I'm going to show you how you can get rid of objects or things in the photo that you don't want. Like for instance, I definitely do not want this word right here in the middle of this photo. Otherwise it's a really great photo. So how do I get rid of a word like this? Well, let's go to the marquee tool, and we could use the lasso tool as well, and we're just going to be as tight as possible and just select this area. Now we're going to double click our background, make it a layer. Now the trick to have the computer automatically make up new stuff inside of this by getting rid of this is to hold the Shift key down while hitting the Delete key. That will bring open this menu right here that allows us to select Content Aware for our fill mode. And what's going to happen is it's going to fill this rectangle in with what it thinks should be in there based on what's outside of the rectangle. So let's see how that works. And you can see it's not perfect. It's using this to fill this in. But for the most part, it's not bad at all. So that's pretty good. All right, let's go ahead and remove this cliff from the background. Now, there's a little bit of white here at the bottom. I'm using my marquee tool as well, and I'm going to Shift Delete and get rid of that as well. And you notice that that's one way of getting, you know, the bottom to have no pixels or whatever. All right, based on what I know already, I'm going to select my Quick Select tool, which will allow me to draw my selection in. And if I make a mistake, and I go too far out for whatever reason, like I accidentally select too much like this, holding the Option key down will allow me, let me get back to my quick select here. Holding the Option key down will allow me to erase away. Now if you made too many mistakes, it's a huge blunder, then just start over by deselecting and then quick selecting again. But that looks pretty good, right? So let's go ahead and invert the selection, Shift Command I, and then hit the delete button and then deselect. I don't like this little thing here, so I'm just going to use my eraser tool to erase it. You can always use the eraser tool as a way of, in essence, drawing that outline to your satisfaction. And again, I don't like this one. I'm going to make that eraser a little bit bigger and erase that so that it's a nice cliff. All right, Let's go ahead and save this. So Command S will open up the save button, and we're just going to go to finished. We're going to call this cliff. Okay, we're well on our way. Let's close that up. Let's look at our photos again. This time we have a little guy on a cliff, and let's take a look at that one. So I want the cliff, and I don't want the guy. So if I were to use the quick select tool, you can kind of see I get the cliff very nicely just by drawing all over it. Now what I also get is this guy. So if you wanted to, I'm going to, by the way, notice too that this layer is now called layer 1. It's not a JPEG. So we do not have a background layer. So when you save this file, this PNG file, make sure you save it as a Photoshop file. Anyway, you notice that this guy's feet are going to be on this mountain. Now normally that wouldn't be a big deal because look how far away it is. We wouldn't even notice it. So if we wanted to just erase him away using an eraser, that's fine. But again, we could use the same technique that we just used before to get rid of stuff. So first off, I don't want the word here, but I know I'm going to delete that. But if I wanted to get rid of just the guy on the mountain, I can select the guy using the marquee tool, try to be tight, don't get more than you need, and then just hit Shift Delete. And you'll notice that the man is completely removed from the mountain range, and at this point I can deselect and actually use my quick select to pick up that mountain range. Now say you wanted this mountain range in the background, you wanted actually to get rid of this guy. You could do that as well by using the polygon lasso and just making sure that you get as tight as possible, but not too tight. Like you don't want to accidentally select any of this foreground object. And so now I've selected with a little bit of room outside, Shift Delete, and you'll notice what happens is now I've just removed the entire mountain. Now I have this beautiful range. So if there's anything in the photo that you do not want, it's a person, it's an extra mountain, it's a stop sign, you can do this technique to get rid of it. I want just the opposite though, so I'm going to undo a couple times. And what I want, I'm going to deselect, go back to my quick select tool, make it a little bit bigger so that I can see the, use the bracket key to make it bigger, and then I'm just going to select that mountain, and then invert the selection, Shift Command I, and hit Delete, and now I have this little mountain that I can save. I'm just going to call it a mountain or something like that. So if I hit Command S, it will save it as a PNG. So I want to go to File, Save As this time, and make sure that I switch this from PNG to Photoshop, put it in the finished area, and call it Mountain. Great. And there we go. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I need some clouds for this this thing that I'm doing. So I'm going to go to my this cloud image, drag it into Photoshop, and you can see that there are some nice wispy beautiful clouds. How am I going to pull these clouds out of the blue background? I obviously can't use my quick select because it just gives me a big blob, and I really just want the wispy clouds. So let's get started by double clicking the background, and just so we have a duplicate layer, I'm going to Command J to jump this layer to a new layer. I'm going to turn off layer 0 so that I'm working with a copy. So if I mess up, I can always go back to this original here. Okay, what we want is to select just the white stuff, or things that are near white, so white and a little bit off white. What I want to get rid of is the blue stuff. So because we know that we're going to be selecting for a color, I'm going to go to my Select tab here, and I'm going to go to Color Range. This will allow me to select a color instead of an area. And the way that this color range selector works, it has a fuzziness slider, normally set to like 32 or something. And what you do is you start by clicking on the area you want to select. Now I have a choice. I can select all the white by clicking on the white here. And you notice that it starts to select stuff that's white. If you want to increase the fuzziness, that increases how close the color is to what I picked. So if I pick this bright white, everything that's close to that starts getting selected. You can kind of see that, and that'll give me that wispy look. So you can see the gray areas are going to be partially selected, and then the white areas are fully selected, and then the black areas are going to be completely transparent. That's how it's kind of going to work. So I'm just going to pull this up after selecting the hard white. Now, if I select something that's softer white like this, you'll notice I get a totally different result, right? And I have to bring that fuzziness down because I really need a lot of black. I want the black in there. But you notice that down here, none of this is being selected. It's black. So how do I add to a selection? How do I add to what I'm selecting here? What you do is you hold the shift key down, you notice it changes the icon, and then you click on the additional color you want to add to the selection, and notice now that that color is added. Another possibility is to click and hold the shift and then drag across all the colors you want, and you'll notice now I've gotten even more colors with a smaller fuzziness. The idea is to balance the amount of color that you get and try to get as little gray as possible, unless it's wispy like this, in which case you kind of want it. I'm going to hit OK right now, and then I'm going to, and now if I hit delete, this is selecting the white, the cloud, so I'm going to invert the selection, and then I'm going to hit delete. And currently this is what I've selected. Now you can see that there is some fluffiness there, and if I add a new layer and then fill it with black and put it under that cloud layer, you'll see this is the cloud elements. This is what I've gotten selected. And maybe that's not exactly what I want. I could obviously get rid of some of the toning by making the color of these clouds desaturated. But let's try this again. This is why we have this. And this time I'm going to select the blue instead of the colors of the cloud. So I'm going to select the layer 0. Turn off the other layer, otherwise I won't know. And you can see what happens if you have it on. You don't see it, but those clouds are there. You see that? Anyway, I'm going to turn that off so I'm not on it. I'm on the layer 0. I'm going to go to select color range. And this time I'm going to click to start on this blue here. I'm going to lower the fuzziness a little bit. And then I'm going to click in different locations for different color blues until I have kind of a nice, you can kind of see where things are here. Like I don't have any of this blue, I don't have any of this blue, and none of this blue. And now I'm having stuff that's a little more wispy. I'm going to bring up the fuzziness a little bit so I have a little bit more, obviously, fuzziness, right, in my clouds here. And then I'm going to hit OK. Now this time I did select the blue, so I can actually hit the delete button. And then this is what this selection looks like. And you can kind of see there's some nice looking clouds here. So here's the other selection. And then here's this selection. So it depends on how you select your color range, but you can see that you have now 2 sets of clouds. I'm just going to call this cloud 1, and then I'm going to call this one cloud 2. And I'm going to get rid of this black layer because we don't need it any longer. And I'm just going to save this set of clouds, turn both of these on. I can even move them around just so I can see them. And I'm just going to save these 2 layers into a Photoshop document. So File, Save, go into my finished, and I'm going to call this Clouds. There we go. All right, I'm going to close this out. Let's go ahead and pick up this fish layer. I'm going to add this to Photoshop, open it up. And what I'm going to want are a couple fish to be swimming around my scene. And we can go ahead and try the Object Select tool first as a potential, because it looks like it's going to be easy to figure out what the object is here. Obviously, if we used Color Select, it would be a problem because the blue is part of the fish, so it wouldn't work for this. Let's double click the background to unlock it. And I'm going to jump this because I would like 3 different layers with 3 different fishes. So let's jump this once, Command J, and that duplicates it. And we're going to do this one more time, Command J. And then I'm going to turn all of them off except for this first layer, layer 0. And I'm just going to come in with my Object Select and let go. And you'll notice that although the Object Select did a pretty good job, it didn't do a great job. I still have stuff missing. So I'm going to go to my polygon lasso. Holding the Shift key down, as we talked about before, adds to the selection. And I'm just clicking, 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 clicking. And then when I get back inside here, I double click, and now that is added. Now to take away from a selection, we talked about this already, hold the Option key down, then start clicking, click, click, and this is all going to be removed. As soon as I'm out of there, double click, boom, that gets rid of the selection. So at this point I've got my fish it is selected. I want the opposite. I would like everything else deleted. So Shift Command I, and then hit the delete button. And now we have a fish that's blue that's on this layer, fish 1. Let's do that again for the other fish. So I'm going to open up layer 2. I'm going to just call it fish 2. And I'm going to select something different. I'm going to select this. So go, again, start with the object selection tool. Just select something, see how good a job it does. Did pretty good. Missing some stuff here. So if anything is missing, polygon lasso, and hold the shift key down to add to the selection, like that. Hold the shift key down to add to the selection. Hold the shift key down to add to the selection because it's missing that tail. And you can kind of see what we're doing here is just going through little by little and picking up things that were missed by the automated thing, the automated selection. And if to deselect or to remove something from the selection, you're going to like do the opposite of shift, which is option, and you're just going to option click and get rid of things that you don't want. All right, I hope that makes sense. Maybe this doesn't look that good. I'll just make this a little, get rid of that. And there we go. Invert that selection, Shift Command I, and then hit the delete key, and there's your second fish. And then fish number 3, you can go ahead and do that. I'm just going to delete that because you guys probably have a clear idea how this is going to work. But I definitely have 2 fish on 2 different layers, right? So just be aware. By the way, if you do not have your auto select turned off, then please do so. And then to switch between these 2, you just have to switch the layers this way, right? There we go. We're friends. All right. Save this, Command S, in the finished area as fish. And there we go. Close that up. And finally, last and probably least, no, not least, probably not least, but whatever, is our Photoshop file of a castle. Now, I would suggest you try figuring out what the best way to go about this is. What we want is this castle to be put on the hill that we actually created. Not the cliff, but this hill right here. So we want the castle to go up here. And what we'll do is probably put it behind this. So we don't need the bottom part or the base of the castle. We just need the top part here. So if you haven't figured it already out, I'm just going to hit the W key to get to our quick selection area, and then I'm going to select the quick select tool, not the object. I have no idea if the object select tool is going to work. I can try it. Who knows? We haven't tried this. And it selected the tree, which we could get rid of if we want. Did a pretty good job of selecting everything else. But I'm going to deselect, Command D. And I'm going to try the quick selection tool. This allows me to get closer. I'm going to make the brush a little smaller with the bracket key. And I'm just going to go through and kind of paint over everything generally, see what it picks up. Looks pretty good. Just want that. Remember, this is all going to be hidden by the mountain under here, so we don't need anything more than that. Notice here, it didn't select this, so I'm going to make the thing a little smaller. There we go. And now I've got too much selection. Holding the Option key down deselects. Notice that there's something missing right here. That chimney is missing. So obviously my tool is a little too big, so bracket keys to make it smaller. And then now that's gotten in there. Oh, missing an entire steeple here. So I'm going to select that. Select that. You can kind of see that you have to kind of go through. Some things you're just not going to pick. If you want this long pole thing, you're going to need to do some work with the lasso tool for that. I don't care. I can barely see stuff. That's fine. This looks good. And so when you're selecting, you always kind of go around the selection to make sure that you've got everything selected the way you want it to be selected. All right, it looks pretty good. I don't think I made a mistake. So I'm going to invert that selection and then hit the delete button. And I'm going to take a look at my happy work, and it looks pretty good. Now, we're going to do the same thing as we did before. I'm going to go to the plus button, to the fill tool, and then D for default, and I'm going to fill a black layer because what I want to do is like get close and see where the issues might be. And you can see the halo I'm going to hide the extras here. You can see this halo around some of the selections that you picked up. And so to get rid of this halo, you're going to have to go into that layer with the eraser tool, holding the shift key down. And you're just going to have to go in and erase away some of those halos, right? Especially when you start actually creating things that are going to be seen really close up. For this project, we're not too worried about it, but I definitely want you to be aware that most of the time when you select something and you put it against a background that's the opposite color. So if this was a black background and you were selecting something that was going to be on a white background, you'd want to do this part because this is just going to clean everything up really nicely, like our Terry Gilliam video that we saw in class where he used that black magic marker to kind of like fix stuff. Okay, so I think we're pretty good. While I was talking, I was telling you what I was doing. We're pretty good with that. I'm going to throw this black layer away. Again, this was just to help me. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this as the castle, check castle. But we're just going to call it castle here. And we're going to hit save. And we're going to hit OK. And then we're going to close. And then we're done. We've pretty much learned all about the tools that we're needing for selecting. We learned about the marquee tool as our regular tool here. We talked about how we can add to a selection by holding the shift key down. We talked about the polygon lasso and the lasso tool to make different shapes. We talked about the quick select tool that allowed us to paint in a selection. We talked about the object select tool, and then finally we talked about the color range, being able to select a color for you instead of selecting an object, and that allowed us to do stuff like this. We talked about the content aware fill by holding the shift key down with the delete key. That allows us to remove things from the image, like these two gentlemen right here. Just delete them just like that. And now they're gone. Actually, they're not totally gone because I used, instead of a marquee, I used this is what happens when you get too close. But when you have a bigger marquee and you just shift delete them, you can kind of see that deletes them. You can delete these people, don't like them. And you can see this is not always perfect. These people were in the frame. The computer thought they were part of the geometry. But getting rid of them and then getting rid of them again, that kind of works. All right, so those are some of the things that you should have learned for Photoshop. And now let's go ahead and finish this off by bringing all these beautiful things into motion. So let's go ahead and start motion up. This is what we did in class. And I think I have everything here. Balloons, fish, clouds, cliff. I got everything. All right, we're opening up motion. It's taking a moment. Yes, we actually did all this in class. Okay, motion is almost open. Hooray! I'm not cutting this out because I'm just doing this, right? All right, this time, because we're doing cutouts this week, I want you guys to start using, just because we don't care about 12 frames per second anymore, the computer's going to do all the animation work. So go ahead and select Broadcast HD 1080p, a frame rate of 2997, that's standard, and a duration of 10 10 seconds, right? This is 300 frames or 10 seconds. 300 because it's 30 frames per second now. And we're going to hit open. We're going to start by adding a background object to our scene here. I'm just going to go to generators and then I'm going to select gradient. And what that's going to do by default is add a gradient to our scene. I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to actually just use the fit window, or I could use the 50% because I want to see not only what's in the frame but what's outside so that I can actually work with this. This is going to be our sky, so I'm just going to call it SKY. Please start labeling things, please. I'm going to click on our inspector tab, and you can see if I wanted to change the colors of the sky, I could do that here. I could also change the location for the midpoint. You can kind of see that works here. I'm going to undo that. I can drag this in or up. So this is our midpoint, right? And just by clicking on these objects, you could then change the colors of the gradient. I kind of like the gradient the way it is, so we're going to just stick with that. And because it's far, far, far away, I'm going to go ahead and lock the sky layer so that it's like now I can't select it anymore. Yay. All right, let's go ahead and import an object. So we're going to go to our finished folder. And the first thing I want to do is import this water PSD. And now I'm just going to hold the shift key down while selecting this water so that I can resize it so that it fills up the screen. Notice that it goes even further out left and right than it needs to, which is fine. And I'm going to bring it down here to right where the kind of horizon line begins, and that's it. That's my water layer. And you'll notice that the transparency it works really well. Now that water layer is already called water, which is great. So we'll move on to the next thing. So like import, and I'm going to select my cliff layer next. And you'll notice that the cliff layer is now transparent. I'm going to hold the shift key down to make it bigger, and I'm going to just set it up so that it looks a little bit like this. I want the cliff to be on this left side. Now, if you wanted the cliff on the right side, you can just take this over and move it, and now you've, in essence, flipped the cliff around, and you can have it on this right side. It doesn't matter. Either way is fine, right? Maybe I do like it on this side just for a change. Now you'll notice we talked about the fringing element, and this would be something you would go into Photoshop and remove before putting it into the scene. Okay, so we have our cliff. Obviously it's in front of the water. If the water were in front of the cliff, although this looks really cool, it's just not working for me. All right, the next thing we're going to do is import our balloon 1 layer. And now we have a balloon. I'm going to zoom out here just so I can see how this is looking for my composition. Balloon is way too big, so I'm going to hold the shift key down and get it smaller. There we go. And I'm just going to put it there. We'll put some motion on it later. Balloon. Let's go ahead and import balloon number 2. All right, there's our balloon. It's smaller, but not small enough, but still, we'll just holding the shift key down. Oops, accidentally rotated that. Now, obviously, if this is a balloon that's in the sky, it's going to be behind the cliff. So I'm going to take the balloon and move it under the cliff. Now it's behind the cliff, and you can see it can come up like this. Very nice. All right. Next thing that we're going to import at this point is our cloud layer. So let's go ahead and just bring this in. Now I want you to be really clear on this, because this time, because it had 2 layers, it's going to ask us, do we move all these together? No. I want all the layers. If you had a specific cloud layer that you wanted, you could do that here. I want all layers. And I'm going to hit OK. And now we have both cloud layers. Now I want you to be aware of this. Take a look at what happens if I select cloud 1 and I move it. Notice how it gets cut off right there, right here. You see that? Now if I move cloud layer 2 and I move it to the left, notice how it gets cut off right here. It is because it's in this full cloud folder. And this full cloud folder has a fixed resolution if you go to group that's checked. If you uncheck that, now you can actually see that those clouds now can go in and out of that file, that cloud layer. I'm going to physically move that cloud layer out of this folder here, and I'm going to move this one out as well. And at this point, this cloud folder, I can delete that. Remember, we're trying to keep things simple. So now I've got a couple clouds. I'm going to turn one off so that I'm only working on one, see what I've got. Now, you can kind of see that this makes no sense with the clouds at the bottom. The clouds at the top I kind of like. So what I'm going to do is rotate this by holding the shift key. That gives me a full rotation. And I'm going to put it right here. And then maybe I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, holding the shift key down. And I'm going to put it behind the cliff area because the cloud should be behind the cliff. But maybe the balloons will be sandwiched between the 2 cloud layers. Okay, now the clouds don't really show up that well, as you can kind of see for this cloud layer that I just made. It's kind of hard to see. What I'm going to do is go to Properties, and do you notice here under the opacity area, I can actually make those clouds more or less transparent, but I can also change the blend modes. And what I want to do is, instead of like using something that makes things darker, like subtract or darken or multiply, I want to make things a little bit lighter. So I'm going to select the Add button, and you'll notice right away that those clouds are now way more beautiful. They feel like way more like clouds, and this is because the cloud blend mode has changed. Now you could try different things like overlay, difference, and all of them are going to give you different like looks, even with an opacity being 100, right? And you can always dial down the opacity as well. But we're going to use Add for those clouds because I like that. And then what we're going to do is turn on the other cloud layer. And I'm going to just use, and I'm going to flip this around just like the other ones. And I'm going to change the size holding the Shift key down just like the other ones. And this time, I'm going to put those clouds behind the water and in front of the sky. So now these clouds are really far away, so I don't see the clouds on the horizon. And I'm going to change the blend mode to, you got it, Add for those clouds. So they kind of add in. And maybe the opacity, I'm going to bring it down so it's a little bit more transparent. You can kind of see that. So at this point, we've got our cloud layer underneath the water layer. You can kind of see. And I've got my balloon layer that's, for this one, in between, sandwiched in between this cloud. And so you can kind of see that if I turn this balloon on and off, that it actually is behind that cloud layer. And this kind of looks good right there. I really like that. Let's go ahead and import our our mountain layer. So go ahead and hit import. And you can kind of see this could be a great foreground element, right? Make it really big. Would be really nice. It does take up a lot of space, or we could actually use it out in the water. I'm going to undo a couple times and make this smaller, holding the Shift key down. And we're just going to actually put that out in the water, way out there, like far away, maybe over here. And I'm going to want to put it behind the cliff. So obviously mountain goes behind cliff, which is nice because this is all labeled so beautifully, because that's what I did. And I'm going to flip it around so that it feels more like something like this. Okay, so this kind of looks nice in the cliff. I think it kind of overlaps kind of nicely. And let's go ahead and put our castle on the top of that cliff. So import the castle. And you can kind of see it's right there. And I'm going to move this under the cliff. Not cliff, I'm sorry, mountain. So that it's behind. I'm going to zoom in here using the 100% there. And I'm going to hold the Shift key down, make the mountain small. And there we go. Maybe rotate a little bit. Put it on top of the mountain there. And that's really far away. There we go. And that's our cliff. Now let's go back to 50% so we can see how things are looking. So we've got our castle. It's on our mountain. Maybe the mountain could be a little further away, so make it smaller, higher up. And then make our castle a little bit smaller. Castle, smaller, taller, so we can see it. There, Disney Castle. And then maybe both the mountain and the castle could be in a group. So right click, select group. This way I can just close this up and call it object in ocean. Notice I accidentally just started playing here. And then I can move this over here. And maybe I want to move the balloon up. You can just kind of make things work the way you want here. You can put a unicorn here if you can find one online. You get the idea, right? Okay, the final thing that we're going to be doing is adding some motion to our scene here. Because right now we have a beautiful scene that we've created, but you know, it would be nice if there were some motion. Just to show you, if I turn this group here on and off, that's everything that's in that group is the scene that we're seeing. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is maybe what we're going to do is have these balloons kind of, you know, floating a little bit around. So what I'm going to do is select the balloon, go to behavior, go to parameter, and what I'm going to do is maybe I'm going to do a wiggle. And let's see what happens when I do a wiggle. So I add a wiggle to this balloon, and you'll notice that nothing's happening because I haven't applied it to any properties. And so what I'm going to do is apply it to the X and Y, up, down, left, right position. And let's see what that does if I hit the space bar. Okay, so that just kind of wiggles that object around. That's not bad, right? You guys can be, you're happy with that. Obviously the wiggle is a little bit noisy, so I'm going to take this noise down a little bit so it's more soft like this. So let's restart this. So you can kind of see, and it's also a little bit like, I want the pixels to be higher, so I'm going to just click on the pixels here and make it more wiggly. I'm also going to take the entire ball thing and move it down and then go back to the wiggle. And then what I'm going to do is make the frequency a lot smaller so that it's wiggling, but it's not going crazy. So now it's doing something like this. So like wind is like doing things to it. Let's take that same wiggle and option drag it on the other balloon. So I'm holding the option key and then dragging it onto this balloon. That duplicates the wiggle. I'm going to select this and I'm going to do a wiggle offset so that it's not wiggling exactly the same way. So that both balloons now are wiggling or moving around based on some random wind property. You can kind of see that right here. So we got the wind going. Let's take the clouds that are in the background. So this is our cloud layer. Notice that they're not that big. What I wanted to do is just kind of slightly move them, but obviously I'm going to run out of cloud. Well, that's not too bad. So let's move it from left to right, this cloud. And you guys kind of know how to do that, right? Behaviors, basic motion. And then what I'm going to do is throw it. And I'm going to throw it left to right. Now, if you don't see the HUD, you can just open it up here. And I'm just going to hold the shift key down so it only throws one direction. Now I'm going to put my playhead at the end to see how far I'm throwing. So it starts there. And then I'll put it at the beginning. And then I'm going to move this entire cloud layer back. And now what I've got is that cloud layer is nicely moving. And maybe the other cloud layer needs to move too. So I'm going to select that throw. And I'm going to hold the option key and then drag it onto that second cloud layer as well. But this time I'm not going to have the throw velocity be the same. I'm going to make it a little bit, maybe a little bit slower so that, you know, everything is a little bit less. So instead of 43, I'm just going to go 14. Then we're going to see how that looks. So you can see the cloud that's more up front is throwing faster, and the cloud that's in the back is throwing slower. I definitely want the, I'm going to lock these up so we can see them, but I definitely want this balloon that's in the back here. I want this underneath the cloud layer. You can kind of see that's one of the cloud layers, and this is the other. So I'm going to take this balloon and actually just drag it under that cloud layer. Unfortunately, it's also under the water layer, but I don't think that balloon is going under the water. So if it did, it would go below the water, right? And so you can kind of see now that the cloud's occluding some of that. And so that gives us this look. Finally, last thing I want to do is maybe to this entire group, let's see if we can add a filter that makes everything look kind of interesting. So they got a bunch of filters here. I could use something like, let's see, I could do line art, and that would make everything into a giant line art layer. You can kind of see that's how that looks. Don't like that. I'm undoing that or turning that line art off. Going to the group here, I'm going to go to looks. I can give it a look, like a noir look. Let's see how that looks. All right, so that's kind of like gives us some things that we could do here. I don't like that either, so I'm going to turn that off. And you can kind of see with filters, you can just have fun. Like go to looks, cool. That's going to give you that beautiful, well, that's kind of an interesting look. So I kind of like that. And notice how it brings everything together because everything has that look. So I'm going to keep that look. Okay. Finally, last thing that we talked about in class, but you do not need to do, because at this point, if you wanted to, everything is moving, you've got some stuff going on, you can go to File, Share, Export Movie, and remember, got to make sure nothing is selected accidentally, like no layer is selected. So deselect everything just by clicking away. Go to File, Share, Export Movie. Make sure that the settings are set to H.264 because you're going to be uploading this to Notebowl. I've got the entire project saved. And then you just hit Next, and you save it as Final Project. And just going to save it to the desktop so I can see it. And then after it's saved, it'll open, and there we go. And that's going to be what you export. Now, looks pretty good. One thing I did show people in class. So I added the object called the light. Now this allows you to switch to 3D, which we'll be doing next week. But watch what happens when I add a light to this. Now here's the light. You can see I can change the color of the light if I want to, make it a little bit more gloomy. But do you notice how the light works here? It's actually just creating a light in some part of it's as if I put a little light source somewhere on this this painting. So I'm going to turn off the cool color here just so you can see how this light looks, and I'm going to turn the light back to white and maybe increase the fall off a little bit. So I've got the fall off start and then the fall off. You notice that if I have a really tiny fall off, it only shows that light there, and if I have a fall off start, that's a little higher. And then finally, the intensity of the light. How bright is that light going to be? I can make it much dimmer or much lighter. And I can add more lights. So you can see here the lights. I can actually add another light and then put it over here to highlight this guy. It just gives it an overall, you can see before, after. Now what we're really seeing here, and I'm going to go ahead and add something called a camera, which we'll be doing as well. And you'll notice nothing really happens. That's because our camera is viewing exactly what we saw before. But watch what happens if I rotate this camera and zoom out a little bit. You can kind of see now that what I really have is this two-dimensional plane with all these objects. Now, if I wanted to take these objects and move them outside of this two-dimensional plane, like so for instance this balloon right here, if I were to drag this balloon a little bit more forward, do you see how I can bring it out of the plane? And notice that it is now behind the lights. So if I turn off my camera, I now have a balloon that's actually being used as a silhouette because the light is behind it. I can also take these lights and bring them forward in Z space. You can see that the Z is at 100, but if I made this much more forward, you can see that the light now is illuminating more. And if I bring it really far back, it gets closer to the objects in the scene. So in this case, it becomes almost like a will-o-wisp element, right? And you can kind of like think, oh, I could actually add something to this light to make it will-o-wispy, right? One of the properties. The same with this light. If I bring this light forward, it's going to finally illuminate that balloon. And now I'm just hitting the space bar to start this over here. And there we go. So lights and cameras are two things that we're going to be talking about next week. And also the fact that we're going to be creating these dioramas and then taking these objects and moving them forward and backwards in space so that at first they'll look exactly like they do before. But when you turn lights on and move these lights around, they're going to illuminate different parts of your scene, which makes things really great, right? So you can get some really interesting looks. And in this case, I can actually put the light right behind this cliff and maybe turn this other light off. There we go. Doop. Well, this light's obviously not off, but you get the idea. Anyway, so lights will be something that we'll work on next week, as well as cameras and those kinds of things. But what I need from you for this assignment is actually just something that moves in time. So just in essence, something that you've constructed and then turn it in as a finished movie file. Okay.